One of the most infamous events that took place with WCW was the firing of the Nature Boy Ric Flair by Jim Hurd, as you see here, Executive Vice President of WCW. And of course, just a few months later, Ric Flair appears on WWF TV. Here you see him with Bobby Heenan on Primetime Wrestling with the NWA belt. And a lot of WCW fans, of course, were very upset at the time with Jim Hurd for firing Ric Flair on July 1st, 1991. I bought this ticket expecting to see Ric Flair wrestle during the Great American Bash Tour that ended up in Oakland, California, July 26, 1991. I bought the ticket, as you can see here, the mid part of June 91. And obviously Ric Flair was fired by Jim Hurd July 1st. And I recall this event vividly with the chants of "We Want Flair" ringing out throughout the entire arena from start to finish. And specifically during the match with WCW champion Lex Luger versus Beautiful Bobby Eaton. And not only in Oakland, of course, a lot of people know during the whole Great American Bash Tour across the U.S., it was heard throughout all the arenas of "We Want Flair." And that leads to Ric Flair in all the interviews talking about Jim Hurd, of course, still pretty bitter over what took place back in the summer of 1991. Let's take a listen to what Ric Flair has to say. Then after Ric Flair speaks, you're going to hear Jim Hurd's side of it, which very few have heard, where Jim Hurd gives his side of the story in this very rare interview with Jim Hurd himself, conducted by Conrad Thompson. But first off, let's take a listen to what Ric Flair has to say about Jim Hurd.
Dumbest asshole ever met in my life. A lot of people swear to God. He thought he was smart. He wanted to call me Spartacus. You kidding me? He put a diamond in my ear. He's the one that got me to cut my hair. I could kill myself for that.
That was around, what, 91 maybe?
Right before I went to WWE,
right.
Yeah.
Right before 91.
Yeah. I mean, I got no time for Jim Hurd. I got no problem telling you.
All right.
He's got a problem with that, Jim will call me.
That will be well, because you don't want people calling you.
No, you can. No, but I'm saying, Jim Hurd is a dick.
We hear that a lot, and we'll talk about that.
I'm sure you have. You have to.
Everybody talks about Jim Hurd.
Manager of Pizza Hut running wrestling? Are you kidding me?
Now let's take a listen to Jim Hurd's side of the story. Here you see him back in 1991 as, of course, Executive Vice President of WCW Wrestling. As we move forward, presently he looks a lot different than he did, of course, back in 1991. But nonetheless, let's take a listen here to Jim Hurd's side of the story when it comes to Ric Flair being fired. Also discusses the payroll and the payouts, specifically when it comes to not only Ric Flair, but also Lex Luger and Sting and Arn Anderson. At the very end of this, he gives basically details and basically disputes what Jim Hurd has to say as far as payoffs are concerned with WCW back in 1991. Let's take a listen.
Talk to me about the Flair contract, because it feels like that comes to a head in July. I think he's wanting a new contract or to negotiate an extension. You guys want him to take a pay cut. You even tell him that, hey, we're going to put you in Baltimore and Los Angeles, and we're going to put you in mixed tags. He's going to be teaming with Paulie Dangerously to take on Lex Luger and Missy Hyatt, who at the time was being managed by Jason Hervey, which is probably a whole other story.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it comes to an impasse, and I think it becomes a bit of a shouting match about that belt, and he's relieved of his duties.
That's right.
Talk to us about how
I took the belt and I said, "We own the belt. You don't own the belt." And he said, "I'm the champion. I own the belt." And I said, "No, that's the belt. It's the NWA's belt." And so, those things deteriorate into things that never happened or couldn't happen. And so he ends up at the Vince. Vince sees another opening, and he does it.
Talk to me about the decision to not just let Rick drop the belt. I mean, Great American Bash 91, the posters and the commercials were already out there. It's supposed to be Flair versus Luger, and you want him to drop the belt. He doesn't want to. He wants a contract extension. You want him to take a pay cut. Eventually, it becomes just go drop the belt to Barry. And it just gets to a situation where he's not performing anymore at all. What was the reason for the divorce between World Championship Wrestling and Ric Flair? Did you ask him to take a pay cut, or were you just not willing to extend his current deal?
I just wasn't. I didn't want to pay the same amount that I was paying at the time because I was getting pressure as far as the money's coming in, and so the dynamics never change.
In your opinion, was Flair justified to dig his heels in, knowing that supposedly Lex Luger, who he helped effectively make a top star, was making $600,000. Sting was supposedly making more than that. Why would he make half of what those guys that he helped make?
Luger never made more than $240.
Okay.
Never.
Okay.
So that, and so the difference between his contract and Ric's contract was huge.
Okay.
And you can try to make them all happy because that's what you want to do. You want a happy group so that they will work together and do the same things that we felt we needed to do to attract the kind of eyeballs we need from around the United States to fulfill Turner's ideas of what he wanted. And that's always in the back of your mind when you work for Turner. He's not only a visionary, he's brilliant, and you've got to always remember that he sets the rules, you abide by the rules, and wrestlers don't understand that. I set the rules, and you as a wrestler abide by the rules. And Ric just finally, it just wouldn't work with Turner's deal.
How much of that was complicated by Flair's attorney, Dennis Guthrie? I read that you and he just did not get along at all.
I didn't like him from the day I first saw him because he lawyerized me and coming through the door. And I said, you guys, you may think you have all the tools, but I'm telling you one thing, my guy behind me has got the tools, and that's cold cash.
Ultimately, in hindsight, do you regret the way that whole thing happened with Flair? It does feel a bit like, pardon the language, a pissing contest.
Well, yeah, I do. I always thought that Ric and I were friends, and actually, it turned out that I don't think Ric ever really liked me that much. So, those things come to bear when you're negotiating who's going to be the champion and who's going to wear the belt and who's going to get this much money, and all those things come to the fore. And whomever is in the middle between the ultimate monies and the guys here is going to take the brunt of all the criticism. And that was me.
Over the years, you've been criticized for trying to take the belt off of Ric and make other guys. I've always thought you had to try something, because even when Flair was your top draw and was drawing big ratings, you're still losing money. So you haven't really found the solution. You needed to find your Hulk Hogan, and for whatever reason, younger fans just were not as attracted to Ric Flair as they were Hulk Hogan.
No.
So you rolled the dice with guys like Sting and Lex Luger, and it didn't work, but it was certainly worth a try since you were losing money, right?
Well, we were up to a point, and then when we decided to decrease the number of shows we did out in auditoriums and arenas and all, we started making money, big time. And it's called because we didn't have all the travel and all of the setting up and all the advertising and that goes with performing in a St. Louis or Kiel Auditorium or United Center in Chicago. You got a lot of work to do. And once we decreased our presence out in that arena, we started making money.
Let's talk a little bit about Dusty Rhodes. Do you think Dusty Rhodes coming back and being on the booking committee is one of the other things that was sort of the straw that broke the camel's back for Rick? Because those guys just did not get along in 1991.
Well,
right?
I think, number one, Dusty at that point had lost a lot of the energy that was that helped him become the star that he was. And then, as I said before, Dustin came on the show, came on the scene, his son, and there were a lot of, he wanted to push his son, and we felt he was, hurting his own. And I can't, blast a father for wanting his son to succeed, but he was pushing Dustin to the point where he was hurting himself.
Ultimately, it feels like you made one last-ditch effort to try to salvage this relationship with Flair. I think you guys met with him at a Ritz-Carlton in Atlanta on July 8th and had everybody sort of sign an NDA saying they wouldn't talk about this, but you offered him a one-year contract for roughly $750,000. That's what's reported. But at that point, it felt like it was just too far gone. Why couldn't you salvage the relationship there?
Well, because those guys, as I said earlier, their egos wouldn't allow you to settle anything. They wanted to be the top guy, and they both wanted to make the top money, and at some point you got to decide which one do you want to go with.
Let me ask, when you met with him on July 8th, was that based out of you recognizing, hey, maybe we need to let cooler heads prevail and we overreacted? Or was it more, because it was written in the Observer at the time, I believe, that TBS Legal had sort of forced you to try to make amends because technically you had no legal standing to fire him in the first place? Was it you reconsidering, or was it TBS saying, you need to go try to fix this?
Well, I guess it was a little bit of both. You're right, the TBS lawyers were nervous about law, how you were going to be sued, and
sure,
and who really, as you relate to the belt, who owns the belt?
Right.
The guy that won it fair and square, or if you the circumstances surrounding the world's greatest lie,
right,
is hard for lawyers to digest.
Arn, probably the first time you saw that interview. What do you have any immediate thoughts as you watched that back for the first time?
So his solution to fixing the issues was to cut everybody's money.
And it seemed like to me, especially as we listened to the very opening, was Turner was saying, here's your pie. You need to make sure that everybody gets their slice. And so he's claiming, Jim Hurd's claiming, I had to make everybody fit within that pie. Everybody had to have their own slice. And so Rick wasn't happy with the slice that we kind of had for him, but I was just doing my job of what Turner wanted and kind of pushing the blame back to what Turner's expectations were. And he was just the middleman. That's kind of how I saw him trying to explain what he was trying to accomplish. And he also then stated that Luger wasn't making 600. He was making 240. So that's a big difference in numbers, from 600 to 240. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, do we know? Is it documented what Luger? So
do you believe that? Do you believe Lex was making 240? Listen, I'll give you some facts, okay? Lex, with Jim Crockett Promotions, when he came in, they were sky high on him. Lex got a $350 per year. I don't know if it was times 2 or times 3, but that was the deal, $350. Okay, that was with Jim Crockett. Now, if you think Lex is going to come in to WCW when he still has the WWF card to play and take over $100,000 cut, I ain't buying that.
No
Based
way.
on what? Because one thing Hurd did was made It's very clear that when he saw Sting and Luger and the Steiners, he saw the core of his company. And you know what? Good choices. Look at those guys. If you're building new superstars, those guys would have been a great group to start with, a nucleus. But you don't cut your biggest star at the time, which was Ric Flair. Forget about the title. We're just talking about star power. You're going to cut his money. I think Rick was probably making for Crockett maybe 6 something. I'm just guessing now. Now you're going to cut him down to 330. Another thing, Rick, said, well, it was Rick put the deal together with Hurd for Tully and I to come back from WWF. Okay? They offered us $250 times 3. Now, you're telling me now that went south when Tully, was not brought back. And the quote to me was, when I went in to sign my contract, is, we're going to be honest with you, Arn, we're not hiring Tully because of his legal issues, and we're going to cut your money over the 3-year period from $250 times 3 and make it $250 let's see, it was $250, $200. No, it was 3 times $250. I'm sitting here, I'm so flipped, I was drawing a blank. It was 3 times $250 was my deal. Okay. And we're going to cut it $50,000. So it went from $250 down to
$200 per year.
$200, yep. And then $156, I guess, would have been the 3 years, right?
So did they cut 50? Did they go 200, then 150, then 100? Like they scaled down 50 each year?
No, I kept 1 year at 250,
Okay.
then 200, then 156. So it was a total of $150,000 it cost me.
I got
over the 3-year period.
Okay.
Now you're telling me they're going to bring me in, and originally with my deal, and I'd be making more than Lex Luger?
Yeah.
Do you think that's a fact?
No
That's
way.
Bullshit. There's no way that was going to happen. So there's another chink in the armor about telling, lies.
That Luger was making 240. Yeah.
Yeah, that never happened.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where when you're talking about cutting Flair's money from probably in half down to $350, and I want you to cut your hair, and I want to call you Spartacus and put an earring in.
Take the title from you, the whole thing.
Take the title, cut your money. That was what kind of a beautiful offer was that? Rick had to be going, yeah, I'll take that deal. That's great.
Right.
That's one of the worst things I've ever heard.
And listen, when Flair was the champion, that was one of the reasons back in 1988 of November that Ted Turner purchased WCW. It was Ric Flair as the champion and having him as the brand. Did you ever hear, what Turner actually thought of all this big dispute between his executive and the most important wrestler in WCW up to this point?
I'm sure when Turner said, here's your pie, you slice it up any way you want, then that was probably the last conversation he had about that. I don't think it was something that he was monitoring every week or every month or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Jim Hurd should have been smart enough to go, okay, if I'm going to go Flair, Sting, the Steiners, Luger, that's going to be my core superstars. All right, slice that pie up to make their deals right first.
Right.
And then what's left, don't bring in a bunch of guys that you're never going to put on TV. Where they went south is they just kept hiring guys, and they got to look at them, and they never made TV. So they would get paid a year, sometimes 2 years of guaranteed money. You get some guys that are making $100,000 a year times 2, but never make TV. So where's your return on your investment? That's more slices coming out of that pie. You had to be a little more savvy on who was worth what to even qualify to be able to slice that pie up, right?
I got you. I'm with you. Yep.
I mean, come on, since when, what made him, the ding-dongs, is that what made him qualified to slice that pie up? The one thing he did say is, okay, they quit running house shows. Well, those numbers that we had on last week's show that weren't very good is because hey, we hadn't built anything. We're a startup company. It was not built. We weren't doing anything. We weren't shooting the personal angles that would draw people into the arena. So the right thing was to not run house shows, because here's the thing. Ted Turner bought the company, but we're a television company. So he was paying himself to put our product on TV. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because he owned the
He owned the company and the TV channel.
And the TV he owned so he's paying himself. Well, that made sense to reel it in. Don't have all these expenses and plane tickets and rent-a-cars and rent for the building and all those until you got a company built, and you could do that just by doing it on TV.
And that's eventually why they ended up, stabilizing and moving a lot of their TV shows when Bischoff came in down to, whether they just shot in Florida or whether they just shot in Atlanta and just doing a lot of shows there.
The syndicated shows in Orlando, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and when you could, we had plenty of markets right around Atlanta you could run to do TV. Gainesville, Macon, Dalton, Georgia, Marietta. All kind of little towns that were just short drive back and forth.
Yep.
And it was expenses that they cut down, and I'm sure they did start to see some better returns on their investment. But of that clip I just saw, I don't believe any of it, other than that one part of it, that's when we started to show